There's like a timer. Ah, now it's
Oh,
live. Now we're
right.
live.
Now
Comment
we're live.
section, please let us know if you can see and hear us.
Hey guys, hey guys. Sorry about that. Sorry about the delay. Had some few technical issues. Yeah, and it, it got so bad at one point. I'm completely out of practice with these live chats. We were talking along, and then I realized it wasn't showing on YouTube, and people weren't responding to what we were trying to say. So let us know if you can hear us, and thanks everyone for joining. And really appreciate everyone for coming in. We have Brian Berletic with us. Needs no introduction, from New Atlas, and he's been on the show a few times before. So we're going to be talking about some of the latest issues. You can see we've put some talking points in this notepad. It's nothing fancy, but you're just here to kind of listen to us, what we have to say anyway. So you're not looking for anything fancy like what other YouTubers do. But thanks for joining, Brian. How are you? How's your day, and how you doing?
For the second time, I'm doing very well. I'm very
Good.
happy to be here. I know what you mean though. If you haven't done a live video in a while, I mean a lot. It's what people make it look very easy to do, but it actually
Yeah,
isn't all
yeah.
that easy to coordinate it. Plus, also interview people all at the same time. I'm sure you're like me. You're a one man operation. So
Exactly. Yeah, I haven't done it for a while because I've been really busy with my new job, and it's been hard to schedule any live chats. But yeah, thanks for joining, Brian. Without wasting any more time, let's get started. We'll talk about the first most important topic of the day, which was the Kremlin attack. There was two drones flying over the Kremlin, and looks like from the video they got blown away last minute by Russian anti-aircraft or some other means. I can't tell from the footage, but it looks like from a distance, it looks like they were blown up just before it hit one of the domes. And obviously, there's debris damage. I was reading some of the newspapers this morning, and you can see already some of the propaganda coming out of the West, especially the British propaganda, that this was an assassination attempt on Putin. Um, it was no such assassination attempt. I mean, let's make that clear. It was an attack on the Kremlin, and everyone. And it seems a very really dodgy why they're coming up with this narrative about trying to get rid of Putin and etc. And it does seem like everything's related with this counteroffensive Ukraine was supposed to do. Maybe the West has fallen out of love out of Zelensky. He wasn't even in the country. He was in Finland, and everybody knows he's got no control over his army. He's got no control over Ukraine. He's really is a face, a puppet, and I wouldn't think Zelensky would do anything like that just because he's got a lot of money, he's got a lot of properties around the world. And the last thing he wants to do is attack the Kremlin and get targeted by the Russians and get killed. I'm sure, he's got a lot of money to retire once it's done. But there's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of theories going around the internet on whether this was done by Ukraine, this was done by rogue Azov military, whether this was done from within Russia. And there's a lot of stories coming around. What's your thoughts about it, Brian? What do you think about this whole situation?
well, again, it's hard to tell right now. We have just little bits of information. I've been hearing that it was electronic countermeasures that destroyed the drones somehow. I don't know. I would assume that Russia has its best equipment there in Moscow protecting the Kremlin. A lot of people are suggesting, especially pro-Ukrainian voices out there, are suggesting that this was a false flag. And several exhibits of evidence include the fact that there were people on top of the buildings already in position before the drones came. And they're forgetting that, say, on top of the White House, there are security personnel 24/7 on top of the White House, around the White House, and inside the White House, in the centers of global power around the world. that is how it's done, and Russia is no exception. So that is a ridiculous line of reasoning. I've also heard people say, because it's very obvious that attacking the Kremlin like this gives Moscow a blank check to politically mobilize Russian society even further in terms of this military operation in Ukraine. Another mobilization, mobilizing industry and the economy, things like this. It would be very easy for Moscow to do this because Russian people see their own country under attack. And people say, well, of course, then who benefits the most? Moscow benefits the most. But as I point out, since 2014, that's all the client regime in Kiev has done from 2014 onward is provoke a war with Russia, giving Russia justification for waging war against Ukraine, fighting against the regime, removing the regime, demilitarizing Ukraine. From 2014 onward, they passed laws attacking their own Russian-speaking population. They waged physical war against their own Russian-speaking population. And they were militarizing, with NATO's help, specifically to transform the country into a battering ram against Russia. And we remember papers from the Rand Corporation 2019 extending Russia, and was the number one option, was giving lethal aid to Ukraine, provoking Russia, forcing Russia to invest deeply in military operations in Ukraine to bleed it dry. And so the idea that, oh, well, this is a provocation that allows Russia to escalate, so obviously Russia benefits from this. No, the people who benefit most from this are the ones who want to see a continued proxy war continue between Ukraine and Russia. And so this is one of the results. An attack on the Kremlin is going to help grease the wheels to keep this proxy war going and to prevent any sort of peace deal. And just as you say, AJ, it paints Zelensky into a corner. And this is a guy who wants to enjoy all of his cash and his fame and his notoriety. He wants to enjoy all of that. He doesn't want to die fighting this. He wants other people to die fighting this proxy war for him, but he doesn't want to die.
Exactly.
So, and he has no control over his own forces, and he's not in charge of any sort of military operation. It's the White House, and it's their proxies in Ukraine, in the military, and in these paramilitary organizations that are almost certainly supported by various organizations in the US government and intelligence. Just think about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It could be something in the same vein as that, where it was pretty much the US doing it as part of this proxy war with Russia through Ukraine. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I think, like, for people who think that it is a false flag attack organized by the Kremlin itself, let's just wait and see what Russia does. And if Russia retaliates, but in a very measured, reasonable way, and they continue fighting this conflict the same way that they've been fighting it since February 2022, then it's very obvious it wasn't a false flag, because they're not utilizing it in any shape, form, or way. If there is a drastic escalation or some sort of unprecedented form of escalation, then it may be tempting to at least keep our minds open to that possibility. So we'll just have to wait and see. We have to wait for more evidence to come out. We also have to wait and see how Russia reacts to this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And it raises a few questions, really. I mean, first of all, where were the anti-aircraft or anti-drone guns before they went to the Kremlin? And they would have had to fly all the way from Ukraine into Russia, unless they've been flown from within Russia. Then obviously that brings up more questions. And secondly, do you think this is going to push Russia to go further into Ukraine, like take Kharkiv and go all the way to the Dnieper River, and then after that go into Odessa, and basically Russia's gonna say, we want to basically create as much space between Russia and the West as possible. So we want to go inwards more into Ukraine, and this is just going to give them more impetus to go further in. And also, just want to clarify about Zelensky. I mean, do you think this is a coincidence that there was a phone call between Zelensky and President Xi of China, and they were basically talking. They were having peace talks behind the scenes. There were obviously diplomats being sent into Ukraine, and this was being discussed over the last week or so. So, do you think that, yeah, like you said, do you think this is a coincidence, or maybe somebody who doesn't want any peace has basically thought, you know what, let's do something which will completely destroy all peace talks. Let's attack the Kremlin. And this way, Russia will definitely not want to have any peace talks with Ukraine. And this will just escalate things. I mean, what are your thoughts on those couple of inquiries I made?
So I'll start with the third one first. That's a very compelling idea, actually, that someone does not want to see any sort of peace break out. Who would that be? That would be the U.S. They are the ones who are upset about peace breaking out everywhere. Everywhere China goes, everywhere Russia and China go together, actually, and they're reorganizing the map that the U.S. has divided up and has been destroying since the end of World War II. So that is a possibility that someone is involved in. It could be, again, it could be people within Ukraine working with the U.S. It could even be the U.S. itself. Now, as far as going to the first point, this drone, virtually any drone can be weaponized. DJI drones are being weaponized in Ukraine right now, and so anyone that can buy a drone can weaponize it, and then they can operate. They can get it. They can order it through the mail in Russia, get it delivered to them. They can weaponize it, and then they can have it take off locally in Moscow and carry out the attack. This is something that's very dangerous. The problem with drones are they're small. They're not. There's not a lot of metal in them. Their radar cross section is almost non-existent, and so you need to use other very specialized measures to deal with them. And I'm sure that Russia is going to reconsider these measures and how they have to evolve these to truly protect key, crucial places like the Kremlin, for example. Now, so where was the air defense? I mean, the air defense was there, but it might not have been the most appropriate system to deal with these smaller drones. And something obviously took them out. We just have to wait and see what that was. What additional impetus does it give Russia to go into Ukraine or to change their objectives? I don't think they're going to change their objectives. I think they already know that they need as much space between them and the rest of NATO. They understand that they need to fully demilitarize Ukraine. So, like I said, it could, to a certain degree, allow Moscow to mobilize the Russian population further in ways that would have been more politically difficult otherwise. I believe that Ukraine is going to give Russia a steady stream of provocations that will allow them to do that. Because, like I said, the U.S. put a client regime into power in Kiev from 2014 onward in the first place to be extremely anti-Russian and to provoke Russia and the Russian population in exactly this way. So they are their own worst enemy. Everything that they are doing is on the path to self-destruction via this military operation by Russia. But before that, before the special military operation, they were destroying their economy by cutting their ties irrationally with Russia. So it's a very self-destructive client regime that is running the country into the ground, and now they're doing it militarily as well as socially, politically, and economically.
I don't know if you had a chance to look at the interview by Zelensky, and he was almost in tears, and he was saying things like, oh, we don't have weapons, we don't have the capability of attacking Russia, we don't even have the capability to defend ourselves, we need weapons, we need manpower, we're too focused on Ukraine, how can we be focused on attacking Russia? So did you see his groveling interview? I don't know if you've seen it. He was in Finland at the time, but I happen to think it was quite genuine. I happen to think he actually did not know what was happening because he was in Finland at the time, and if he had any idea this was happening, somebody's going to attack the Kremlin, he would not be in Finland. He would be hiding somewhere, hiding in a bunker somewhere, for example. he would not be flying around, between Finnish and Ukrainian airspace, because he knows if any, and if an attack went on to Kremlin, then he would be absolutely blown out the sky. So I think it's there's definitely somebody else who's trying to um, confiscate the peace talks. And also, I don't know if you watched the Grey Zone. The Grey Zone recently released a video that a couple of the hijackers from 9/11 were CIA operatives. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was basically something to do with that. I mean, what's your? I know it's a conspiracy theory, but I just want to see what your thoughts are regarding all that.
Yeah, again, well, I mean, let's think about it though. Zelensky being in Finland or on his way to Finland, that actually would be very politically risky for Russia to down his plane somewhere in NATO airspace, for example. That would be seen as a major escalation in an act of war. At least NATO would see it that way. So actually, him being in Finland while this happened, that actually makes him look more guilty. And it might have been times for him to be in Finland for exactly that point. I don't think that he's in charge or masterminding any of this. He may be aware of some of these things, but probably mostly not. And so the likelihood that it was someone in Ukrainian intelligence or the Ministry of Defense working with the United States, that's very probable. I think that is most probable, actually. And again, yeah, it goes back to who wants to prevent peace at all costs? Who wants Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian? The U.S. government does. They've openly said so. Had Lindsey Graham say they will fight to the last man. If we create the right conditions, they will fight to the last man. That's what they're doing. That is exactly what they're doing. So I'm almost certain that there are interests in Ukraine that are enthusiastic about doing this. And the U.S. is happy to give them all the help and resources that they need to do so.
Thanks for that, Brian. And yeah, we've got around 550 viewers, which is not bad from my first live chat after like a few months, maybe 4 or 5 months now. If you can help promote it by liking and sharing it, that would be really, really helpful. So any of you guys that are listening, help the algorithm, really appreciate it. So I'm going to go into something different, Brian, and you can see from the notepad, Mark Hamill. Are you a Star Wars fan at all? And people might think, why have I put Mark Hamill drones on my notepad? But if you follow the news closely, Mark Hamill was very much instrumental in getting drones for Ukraine, and not many people know that. He's been an ambassador for raising funds for drones for Ukraine. And I don't know about you, Brian, but Mark Hamill used to be a big hero of mine because I'm a major Star Wars fan. And when I heard this, I was devastated. What are your thoughts? And do you think Mark Hamill had something to do with these drones attacking Kremlin? Or do you think Mark Hamill should go into hiding?
No, I don't think he had anything to do with this. But yeah, I used to like Star Wars. I don't know what's going on. I guess Disney is bent on ruining absolutely everything from our childhood.
Yeah.
But Mark Hamill, he's one of these. This is common with many people in Hollywood. They're actors and actresses. They get paid to say whatever they're told to say, and that's what they do for a living. And they're not most of them. I don't want to paint with too broad of a stroke, but most of them have no idea what's going on. They watch the mainstream media like most other people in the West, and they're just as badly misinformed as everyone else. And so he's doing this drone thing, probably thinking he's doing the right thing. I saw him on Twitter. Actually, I was one of the people that helped point this out. He was doing some video conference with Ukrainians receiving these drones, and one of them very prominently in the background had a Nazi flag, literally a Nazi flag in the background, one of these red and black Nazi Banderite flags. And people were pointing it out and saying, there's a literal Nazi flag in the background. This is who you're helping, Mr. Hamill. You're helping the Nazis. Everything Russia said is true. Look at it. It's right in front of you. And he said he doesn't care about what the flag meant. This was his reply. He doesn't care what the flag means. He's just upset because Russia's invading Ukraine. But if there are Nazis literally everywhere, you cannot point the camera anywhere in Ukraine and not see Nazis running around, and also Nazis getting these drones and using them, that you're helping get to them. Maybe the reason they're being invaded is because they're Nazis. This point of logic never dawned on him. But then again, he's an actor, so again, we're expecting too much for him. He's an actor. He didn't even write Star Wars, let alone it. So he's just the actor playing the role of a hero.
That's
I think
right.
we expect too much from him. But it's a perfect example of how ignorant people are in the West, and how dangerous and even deadly ignorance can be, to the point where you're unwittingly helping modern day Nazis kill people.
Yeah, exactly. And even though Mark Hamill, he's an actor, he has got a huge following. And if he puts stuff like this out on Twitter and he raises money for, these drones, there's a lot of Star Wars fans that would absolutely idolize him, and they would do anything he says. So obviously, they picked him for a reason. And
Yes.
yeah, it's a shame, because he was one of my heroes. Even though he's an actor, he was still a symbol of hope. He was still Luke Skywalker. But yeah, I felt sorry for him when he was killed off in The Last Jedi. I think they did him quite dirty in The Last Jedi, made him into some sort of useless male, and they did him quite dirty, and felt sorry for him, but not anymore. Anyway, let's move on. um, so this counteroffensive, everyone's been talking about it, but there's nothing to see. I mean, there's no counteroffensive. I mean, they did attack Crimea, attacked an oil depot a couple of days ago. And I've also been looking at a lot of Telegram sites, and there was one particular Telegram site where Ukraine was basically gathering lots of troops, and they were gathering about hundreds of troops with armored carriers. And what Russia did, Russia dropped this massive bomb where they were gathering, absolutely massive. And this bomb was like was probably one of the most destructive bombs I've seen in this war, and completely wiped them all out. And we're talking about hundreds, maybe even thousands of Ukrainians who were just gathering around in one space. I saw that happening a few days ago in Telegram, and this was they showed you on the video, and I think that probably put off a lot of Ukrainians, and I think they thought, you know what, let's just forget about the counteroffensive. What are your thoughts about the counteroffensive? Is it going to happen, or is it? I mean, they literally are. They literally have no troops left. I mean, they're literally pulling people from the streets, pushing them into the front lines. They're literally begging for weapons, money. They've got no anti-aircraft guns. They've hardly got any tanks left. There was a story about 3 airplanes which were given by Slovakia and Poland. They were shot down in one day. So, so I mean, what do you think about this counteroffensive? Is it still going to happen, or is it just going to use these men as a meat grinder and just send them all to their deaths? I don't know if you've seen Lord of the Rings. There's a part in Lord of the Rings where the king sends all of his troops into certain death with no there's no chance of them winning or coming back alive. He just sends them to their death for no apparent reason. So I see that comparison. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the offensive is still on. Just like last year, they said they were going to do a spring-summer offensive, and it ended up being a fall offensive. And we remember the results of that offensive. Even the Western media eventually admitted that, say, in Kharkov, there were hardly any Russian forces there. That's why they were able to take all of that territory. Despite there hardly being any Russian forces there, Ukraine still suffered major casualties. They lost anywhere between 1 to 2, maybe even 3 brigades, not just fighting the very few troops that were dug in, but also because Russia utilized its long-range weaponry against the advancing Ukrainian forces. They're out from behind their defenses. It's much easier to target them out in the open as they're moving, and that's what happened there. And then in Kherson, Russian forces were heavily dug in. There was a huge presence around Kherson City, and Ukrainian forces repeatedly tried to break through defensive lines, and they repeatedly failed. And I remember very distinctively the Washington Post writing an article about the nature of the warfare, how lopsidedly in favor of Russia it was. And there they lost probably between 5 to 7 brigades worth of men and equipment. And they spent the whole time from the fall onward waiting for NATO to deliver another army's worth of equipment and ammunition, and also to train another army's worth of manpower. Now, you're talking about the troops, and they're grabbing these people off the streets. This is probably for territorial defense, and this is the force that they're just throwing at the Russians in places like Bakhmut to try to hold the line. They're also using elite forces to kind of bolster the territorial defenses. They have a separate army, supposedly. They have a separate army that they've been training in the UK, across the EU, being trained by the US, by the Germans, by others. They're supposed to be the assault force that they're building up for this offensive. A lot of these are supposedly, again, this is what the Western media is saying. Is it true? I don't know. They're saying that they're new recruits. They have no military experience. They're being trained for, say, 5 weeks, when in reality you get trained between 5 to 6 months to be an entry-level infantryman who still has to learn an awful lot when they finally get to their unit after basic training and their infantry training. They will still have a lot to learn when they get to their unit. But these guys are getting 5 weeks of training, and then they're expected to go on the offensive. It's insane, and it's irresponsible. It's inhumane, and they will die in droves, just like last year, the fall offensive. Whenever this offensive goes, they will be dying in droves. Now, people are saying maybe the offensive won't happen. If it happens, it'll be a complete flop. I don't think people should underestimate the capabilities of this offensive force that they're putting together, because people have to remember it's smaller, it's poorly armed compared to Russian forces, a smaller amount of ammunition, but they will concentrate what little they have along the front line in just a couple of spots, and they will be able to overwhelm the Russian forces there locally. Now, will Russia be able to move reserves around and respond to it, prevent them from taking territory? Will they, just as they've done before, give up territory, knowing that they're going to destroy a huge number of Ukrainian troops, destroy all of their equipment, and wherever the Ukrainian offensive ends on the map, they will be exhausted, their ammunition depleted, their weapons destroyed. And if Russia preserves its manpower and equipment, where does that leave Ukraine? At the end of the losing end of a war of attrition, you talked about tanks, air defense, and aircraft. Well, their aircraft virtually non-existent and playing no role in this conflict at all. Their air defense is actually the reason we see this artillery war unfolding, and the reason why Russia moves so incrementally across the battlefield, because of Ukrainian air defense, which ironically is mostly Soviet-era equipment. It's very effective. They had large amounts of it, and they were able to essentially inhibit Russia from operating openly over Ukrainian airspace, except along the line of contact in a very limited way, close air support at low altitudes. But more recently, you just talked about that bomb, that massive bomb. They've been dropping a lot of massive bombs along the line of contact. They're able to do this because the longer range air defense systems like the S-300, the number of interceptors are dwindling. They've been destroying the actual launchers themselves. These cannot be replaced, and NATO has nothing that is equivalent to give Ukraine for them to replace them with. So as the S-300s dwindle in numbers, they're going to keep most of them around cities and other priority targets, and the line of contact is going to be defended only by shorter range systems like the Buk, ASA, Strela, 10, systems like this. They're highly mobile. They're very effective. They can reach a bomber overhead at maximum altitude, but what they cannot do is reach the range of the glide bombs that Russia is using, which have a 40-kilometer range. They drop the bomb, and it glides 40 kilometers to its target. This is out of range of the air defense systems that Ukraine still has along the front line. So this is a huge problem for Ukraine. And I think one of the reasons the West is pushing so hard to get Ukraine to do this offensive now rather than later is because the air defense problem is only going to grow. It's only going to get bigger. People mistakenly believe this is a cycle where Ukraine does their offensive, then they get reloaded, resupplied, they build up a new army of men, and then they do it again. But actually, each iteration of this process, Ukrainians are worn out more. They're out of more crucial types of systems that NATO cannot help them replace, to the point where eventually there is going to be a critical and complete collapse of Ukrainian fighting capacity. That's what Russia is waiting for. A lot of people are like, especially during the winter, a lot of people said Russia is going to do this big arrow offensive during the winter. And I just didn't think that they would. Number one, they never said that they were going to. Number two, it made no sense, because if they launch something like that, they will lose large numbers of men and machines, just like Ukraine does when they launch an offensive. And this is a war of attrition. So the idea is to kill more of them than you lose. Russia does this by using this incremental, step-by-step approach that they've been using. That's why it's taking so long to take Bakhmut, because they don't want to bleed their own army to death.
Yeah.
They want to bleed Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, I was listening to a lot of Bakhmut reports, and from all sides, from Western side as well as the Russian side as well. And it seems to me not a lot of people are actually reporting this, but I was looking at kind of all the military reports every day, and what Russia has been doing is slowly encircling Bakhmut, and they have been blocking all the streets going in and out of Bakhmut. But they basically left one major route open. And what they're doing is inviting the Ukrainians in, and also they're inviting the Ukrainians to get out as well. And while they're coming in, they're attacking them. And while they're trying to escape, they're also attacking them as well. And Ukraine is suffering huge losses in Bakhmut just on that piece of road, and they've basically got open. But Russia's doing that on purpose, because it's not about taking the Bakhmut. It's all about the war of attrition. I mean, they're just trying to get rid of many Azovs as possible. And I think a lot of people don't report that. And this is what taking Bakhmut is not the key. That's why it's taking so long, because it's not about taking Bakhmut. It's all about trying to get rid of Ukraine's military. And what's your thoughts on that? I mean, a lot of people are not really reporting on that.
Well, exactly. And General Sergei Surovikin said in the fall, he said that the whole point, he's going to stabilize the front line, he's going to straighten everything out. And then what the goal is from that point onward is to grind down the Ukrainian military. Bakhmut is designed to grind down Ukrainian forces. President Vladimir Zelensky visited Bakhmut. Now he has supposedly visited several times. They are politically invested in that city. They cannot give it up. And so they are going to pour their entire army into Bakhmut. And that's what they've been doing. And Russia is using the private military company Wagner to grind them down. They're not even using the majority of their reservists that they mobilized late last year. So it's a huge blunder on Ukraine's part. And for people who are saying, well, look at how much territory Russia is taking, there are different kinds of wars. This is a war of attrition. It is not a war of territorial conquest. Yeah. When the Ukrainian military collapses, Russia is going to be able to take as much territory as they want, because there will be no Ukrainian military to defend it. I don't understand why people can't. I mean, the Western media is full of journalists, so-called journalists, who think in very simple, one-dimensional ways, and they cannot understand this. Plus, it's very inconvenient for their political narratives, and so this goes more or less unreported, undiscussed.
Yeah, and also Bakhmut, they are using Bakhmut as a focal point. So a lot of Ukrainian military troops are going in and out, and Ukraine is basically focused on Bakhmut, and this gives Russia time to focus on other areas. Like if your main focus is Bakhmut, and the world's media is focused on Bakhmut, and Ukrainians are focused on Bakhmut, you as a Russian military can basically go out and do other missions around Ukraine. It basically gives you a free reign, because you're if all of if Ukraine is basically focused on that Bakhmut area, they'll be less focused on other areas. And I think this is a kind of tactic, and this is why they left one road open in and out of Bakhmut. They are basically inviting the Ukrainians to come in and just focus on it. And while Russia is doing other things around Ukraine, I think they are also um, setting up defenses as well. I mean, as a military force, this is exactly what I would do. I would leave one road open in and out, and this goes back to the art of war tactics as well. And I think if you are from the military side, which you are, Brian, I mean, this makes perfect sense. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Exactly. You don't corner an enemy, because then they will fight as hard as possible to get
Yeah,
out. You give them an avenue of escape, and then it's always an option that they will think about in the back of their mind. And while they're planning whatever they're going to do that day, if it goes wrong, we could just get on the road and get out. That is a valid point. Is a little more complicated. There are other conflicts taking place along the line of contact. Avdiivka is another city that is almost completely encircled by Russian forces. This is a place where one of the places they began dropping these huge bombs, these glide bombs. And they made a lot of progress very quickly. And now it's kind of also frozen. This looks like a letter C, a backwards letter C. And all of these Ukrainian forces are coming in trying to prevent Avdiivka from being taken. And this is right outside Donetsk city, where Ukraine has been shelling the civilian population in Donetsk city for 9 years. So there was that. There's Vuhledar. This is another point along the line of contact. And, people are like, well, Russia failed to take it, but they only have a few units working on Vuhledar. It's not a full-scale operation.
yeah,
They're putting pressure along the line of contact to kind of gauge the fighting capacity of Ukraine overall. And it's still holding. The line of contact is still holding for Ukraine, but we can see it's weakening. And with the glide bombs, for example, it's little incremental things like this where it just the pressure keeps growing and growing and growing, and a support here breaks, a support there begins to crack until the whole thing collapses. This is the strategy Russia has elected to use.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. And before I go into the next topic, I wanted to ask you a question. If you were Putin right now, and obviously you've had the Kremlin attack, what would you do differently, or would you keep things the same, or what would you do? What would you change if you were Putin?
No, I think the strategy that they're pursuing right now is the best for Russia, considering the circumstances and resources they have available to them. With the Kremlin attack, they can use this to mobilize society in any way that they needed to already up until this point, but maybe didn't have the political capital to do so. Now they have some political capital to do so, so they might want to take advantage of that. But other than that, I mean, you have to continue this very patient process of conducting this military operation. There's no guarantee that NATO isn't going to try to enter it more directly in some way, just as they did in Syria. And so they have to conserve their military fighting capacity as much as possible while wearing down Ukraine. They have to keep a force in reserve to deal with NATO if they were to enter the conflict in some way. And ultimately, only the Kremlin knows where their actual red lines are and what they will do to enforce them. Only they know that. We don't know that, sitting here looking from the outside in.
Sure, thanks for that. And before I go into the next topic, this super chat just came online asking you a question, and here's my first super chat. So thanks for that, Harry. Really, really appreciate it. And this is why I got you on board to ask your question. So do you want to quickly answer that, and then we'll move on?
This Samat missile, it's primarily for delivering a nuclear payload to targets, and I don't know what kind of crater it would create if it was using just some sort of conventional warhead. The problem is they wouldn't want to do that, because when NATO, when they see incoming intercontinental ballistic missile, they don't know what warhead is on it. They're going to assume that it's nuclear, and they will retaliate. So you would never do that, and we would never find out what kind of crater this would be. I don't think it would be the size of France. That seems France is a pretty big. It's a pretty big country.
We have to talk about maybe a meteorite coming falling into there to get a crater size of France. But yeah, thanks for that, Harry. Really appreciate it. So we're going to talk about Philippines now. And thanks everyone for coming in and viewing our live chat. There's 888 members listening to us right now. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Really appreciate your help and for the algorithm. And thanks for your time as well. So we're going to move on to the Philippines now. And if I can make a start, Brian, I want to give you a quick introduction, and then I'll let you carry on with it. So you have a new Prime Minister of Philippines, Marcos Jr. His father was also a politician and a leader of Philippines once upon a time. And I think there's stories about corruption and all sorts of other things, which maybe we might discuss later if we have time. But Marcos Jr. has stepped in from Duterte. Duterte was a very anti-West but pro-China, and he was when Duterte was Prime Minister of Philippines, he said, it's time for Philippines to make a new change and embrace Asia, including ASEAN, and start making good relations with China and things like that. So he made some good strides. There was a lot of investments coming in from China at the time, and there was a lot of good friendly relationships. And Duterte, in fact, rejected military bases in Philippines numerous times, and I think the US basically really gave him a lot of pressure to put these military bases in Philippines, and he rejected all of them. And then you have Marcos Jr. coming in. And this is one of the problems with democracy, Brian. I mean, when you are the US and you try to, influence a leader, and you're trying to put military bases in your country, and that particular leader says no. If you're a democracy, it's very easy to change leadership. All you have to do is give a bit of money to your opposition, give him all the resources, and get him into power. It's a very easy thing to do when you have a democracy, because it's very easy for corruption and things like that. And also another problem is when you have a democracy, when you as a country are going one direction, and the next president or prime minister comes in and he goes a different direction, so there's no continuation, there's no continuity, and your country cannot grow, because if you have two different people doing two different things, and the next leader comes along, does something completely different. For example, Trump and Biden, obviously they tore each other's agreements. So it really kind of put Philippines in the back foot. And this new leader comes along. He goes to China in his first trip, and everybody in China thought, oh, this guy, he wants to make good friendly relationships with us. Same as Duterte, he wants to carry things on. So we're really, really happy. And they gave him the red carpet. They really, really gave him the red carpet, promised lots of investment, lots of deals. And then a month later, he announces out of the blue, he's going to give 4 military bases to the US. 3 of them are facing Taiwan, and 1 of them is facing the South China Sea. And then he goes to a trip to the US as well. And then also there was an incident a couple of days ago where you had the Coast Guard of Philippines, and they had a bunch of reporters in there. They had reporters from the West, from CNN, and all sorts of Western reporters. And they were going into the South China Sea, and they were trying to ram the Chinese Coast Guard. And this was filmed on camera. and and obviously you had the reporters in the Filipino ship reporting proper propaganda. They were saying, "Oh, the Chinese are being aggressive," when you can see from the video clip that it was this Filipino ship that's trying to ram this Chinese Coast Guard out of the water. So they're being very, very aggressive towards the Chinese. And Marcus Jr. has obviously he's turned a complete 180 and has become what you would say a puppet of the United States. I mean, Philippines was always close to the United States. So it was always a vassal state, and Duterte tried to change things, but now it looks like it's going that way again. And I don't know about you, Brian, but remember when we made a video a few months back, we talked about this NBC video about an attack on Taiwan, and they were talking about flying ships and attacking from the Filipino bases, attacking Taiwan, attacking China. Do the Philippines not seen that video? I mean, I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, obviously I've spoken a lot about this, but I mean, I want to kind of pass it on to you now. What your thoughts about all of this is?
It's a lot of good points. Inside the United States, so-called democracy, Western-style democracy, is a system of, well, it's a system of control entirely. Inside the U.S., there is continuity of agenda because moneyed special interests have control over any conceivable candidate that you can vote for. So no matter who you vote for in the United States, you're voting for the agenda, and that's why there's continuity of agenda in the U.S. Doesn't matter who the president is. From, since I've been paying attention, Bush Jr. To Obama to Trump to Biden, it doesn't matter. It's the same agenda. They just spin it a little bit differently. The same people are in their cabinets. The same people from these think tanks, these unelected think tanks, exist and drive U.S. foreign policy and also domestic policy to a certain degree, regardless of who's in the White House. So that's important to understand. And then Western-style democracy in a country like the Philippines, or here, say, in Thailand, it's exactly as you say. You actually have circles of interest that represent the people in this country. And then you also have a circle of interests that answer to Washington. And if one of these, a member from this foreign-controlled circle of interest gets into power, they will drive the country in an entirely opposite direction of the best interests of the people in that country, best interests of the country's future. They will run the country into the ground, just as what we see going on in Ukraine from 2014 onward. We talked quite a bit about that. And so it's the exact same case for the Philippines. The problem with the Philippines is they were literally a U.S. colony until 1946. I don't know if people know that or not. They were literally a U.S. colony until 1946. And they get their independence from the U.S. from 1946 onward, but so much of their political system had been conditioned by the United States. And this is why when you go to the Philippines, there's so many people that speak perfect English. And even to this day, there are a lot of institutional and administrative systems of control that the U.S. uses to create the next generation of subordinated Filipino leaders. I was just watching a video from CSIS. It's a U.S. government and arms industry funded think tank, and it's titled "A New Era in the U.S.-Philippines Alliance: A Discussion with Foreign Secretary Enrique Manalo." So he came to Washington and he was talking to CSIS, and one of the things that he praised was the U.S. Fulbright program and also Peace Corps, how long it's been going on in the Philippines, because it was literally a colony of the U.S. And what they said, the way they introduced it, this is what they literally said. They said it is to create the new and future constituencies of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. And when they say alliance, that is a euphemism. It is not an alliance. It is not a two-way partnership. It is the subordination of the Philippines to the U.S. at the expense of the people in the Philippines. The Philippines has a much larger population than, say, Thailand, but its economy is a wreck. Why is that? Because everything that the government does is done to serve US interests, not the Philippines' interests. There's a lot of people in the Philippines who understand this and are against this. This is what constituted the support base for Duterte. But this is the problem. Where do you find another Duterte? It's very hard because so many people in the ruling class in the Philippines have been literally conditioned by these administrative organizations the US imposes on the Philippines and also everywhere else around the world. And then you have the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and all these other programs the US uses to work their way into every aspect of the Philippines politically, socially, economically, militarily. You have all these training programs for officers in the Philippines. And then these officers, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to lend their support to an agenda that dovetails with Washington's, even if it's at the expense of the Philippines, because they're part of that club. They want to stay part of that club. If you look at the trade, and I'm looking at the trade right now between where it exports and where it imports from, China by far is their largest trade partner for imports and exports. The U.S. is a very small percentage. Most of the Philippines trade is in Asia, so the trade within Asia is the most important for the economy of the Philippines. I gotta kind of like look over this thing on the screen. So a stable Asia is what is in the best interests of the Philippines, and yet they are allowing the United States to reoccupy it militarily, because that had been a thing for a long time, even after the Philippines got independence, a very large U.S. military presence there. And the Filipinos had gotten them out, and now they're coming back in. And what do you think the U.S. is going to do in the region with this military presence? They are going to use it to destabilize the region and to transform the Philippines into a battering ram against its largest trade partner, China. So it's inconceivable when you look at it rationally. But of course, we're talking about decades of conditioning an entire population to be subservient to the United States.
Yeah, exactly, Brian. And I was also reading some history about Marcus Jr. and also his father, Marcus Sr. And I'm not going to talk about the full history of it, but his father was very, very corrupt. He had lots of human rights abuses, and he was eventually pushed out of power, and he fled the Philippines, and he moved to Hawaii, where he was given a nice house and looked after by the US. And Marcus Jr. was actually raised in Hawaii, and he moved on to the United States and studied there. And looks like he's a perfect candidate, basically carrying on from his father's work, because his father basically completely capitulated to the United States at the time and completely destroyed the country, and that's why he had to flee. But looks like Marcus Jr. has been conditioned from a young age, and he's been trained, and now he's gone to Philippines to basically give it back to the United States and to use however they want. And I just feel sorry for the Filipinos, because any conflict that happens in the Taiwanese Strait, even in the South China Sea, I can see Filipinos being dragged into a war that they do not want, and this is going to be really, really bad for not only Filipino people but for the economy, and also Philippines. They've always had civil wars in the past, and Philippines has got a lot of islands, and everybody in different islands wants to be independent. So there's a lot of issues in Philippines, and and last thing they want is to be roped into another war. And the Filipinos, I don't know if you remember the Second World War, the Japanese invaded Philippines, and then the US took over from the Japanese, and they've always been, a race that's been invaded, and it's about time they had some actual freedom and went along their own path. It looks like now they've gone back to the US's arms again, and now they're going to be, like you said, a battering ram in any future war against China. And do they not watch the news? Do they not see what's happened to Afghanistan, Ukraine, Iraq, Libya. I mean, these Filipino people, they're going to be used just as they are using the Ukrainians up till the last Filipino, till they get what they want. And I mean, I just don't understand. I mean, there's a video on the internet by MSNBC, the one we went through, where they were actively using Philippines, as a base to attack China. And do they not watch these videos? I just don't understand the mentality of people around this world. I mean, what are your thoughts?
The conditioning that the U.S. has imposed on the Philippines for decades and decades now, over a century, really, it has transformed many people in the population into people who are blind to reality. So even if you showed them that, they wouldn't believe it. Just like Americans, most Americans, you try to talk to them about what the U.S. government is actually doing versus what they think it's doing because of what MSNBC or Fox News told them. There's a complete disconnect between them and reality. And the deeper this conditioning goes, the harder it is to break. So that is one problem the Philippines has. I was listening to the Secretary of Foreign Affairs from the Philippines speaking at that CSIS event, and he was constantly talking about how, well, the Philippines has to be in this partnership with the U.S. for the future of Asia. Does he not realize that the U.S. is not even located in Asia? Does he not also realize that the Philippines' largest trading partner is China, not the United States? The U.S. is actually kind of low on the scale there, on the list. He also talked a lot about international law, upholding international law with the help of the U.S., and they talked about Taiwan constantly. I mean, this is one of the main reasons they're putting these military bases there, just like you said, that shamelessly and openly using the Philippines in this war against China. And they would rather have the Philippines pay the cost for this war rather than the U.S. pay the cost. So they're talking about Taiwan, they're talking about international law, and they're omitting the fact that it's the United States and its violation of its own agreement with Beijing and international law that is at the core of this conflict and these tensions over the island province of Taiwan. So it's unbelievable. It's from the lower levels of society in the Philippines all the way up to the top. And then even if Marcos Jr. wanted to rebalance, another thing that this Secretary of Foreign Affairs kept saying continuously, parroting verbatim U.S. State Department talking points about U.S. foreign policy, claiming that it's the Philippines' foreign policy also. And he constantly and very deliberately kept saying, this is our independent foreign policy, as if just saying that would throw us off from the fact that you are parroting verbatim what the U.S. State Department says is U.S. foreign policy. So it is so sad and painful to watch a nation with so many people with so much potential being driven into the ground by people who are subservient to the U.S., a nation on the other side of the Pacific Ocean that is going to commit the Philippines to years more of working against their own best interests, and it could possibly lead to a war that will destroy the country again.
Yeah, exactly, Brian. And also, if you look at where the military bases are located, three of them are facing directly Taiwan, and one of them is facing the South China Sea. If the US wanted to help Philippines, or the Filipinos are saying, oh, these military bases to help are to help us if we have any you know any weather events or anything like that, so the US can help us. But why face three of them towards Taiwan, and why face one of them in the South China Sea? It doesn't make any sense. Their narrative doesn't make any sense. It's obviously targeted to China. And I was also reading some books about the history of the South China Sea as well. And I basically found out very recently that the islands that Philippines controls, when USA was uh, basically running Philippines at the time, they needed some military bases, and it was the US that actually pushed Philippines to grab those islands in the South China Sea. And the reason China could not take them back, because they had a military backing by the United States, and they obviously had this they're also protecting Taiwan as well. They're also protecting the South China Sea islands away from China at the time, and and China obviously was very weak at the time because the civil wars, and also you know, they were very, very poor back in the day, so they didn't really have any capacity to take these islands back because the US was basically patrolling them. Same with Taiwan as well. So it was all down. If you look at the history, it was all down to the US, and now Philippines have taken over the South China Sea, and now they're claiming all of South China Sea. In fact, they are now renaming South China Sea into West Philippine Sea.
Yes.
I don't know if you noticed.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean,
Yes.
it's gone to the point where if you look at Western maps, or if you look at Google Maps, it clearly says West Philippine Sea rather than South China Sea. So you know, it's crazy how the West thinks. And what are your thoughts about this? 'Cause, it's only recently I found this out, which was quite fascinating, actually.
It's very important for people to understand history, what really actually happens. And we can consistently hear the US complaining about Russia and China being revisionists. But when you actually look at the history, these are things that should be revised because it was a tremendous injustice. It was the US and Europe playing empire all around the globe at the expense of absolutely everyone else on Earth. And these are things that should be righted. And yet, instead, the collective West is trying to reimpose themselves, reassert themselves over their former colonial holdings. So that's one part of it. Going back to this CSIS talk with the Secretary of Foreign Affairs from the Philippines is very important because the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, that's a very senior position in the government of the Philippines. And so people should listen to it. Now, he's in Washington. Of course, maybe that's why it was such a pro-US speech. There was zero balance in it at all. He did refer to the South China Sea a couple of times as the South China Sea, but mostly as the West Philippine Sea. He was every time he's talking about China and how there's all this trade and everything. We all know that China builds a tremendous amount of infrastructure with its partners. Then when he talked about ties with the US, it was all of these ambiguous word salads that mean absolutely nothing. The only tangible partnership that the US has with the Philippines is militarily, and it's only so that the US can use the Philippines as a staging point for its war with China. Again, the Philippines' largest trading partner, and this would be a war fought in Asia where the Philippines does most of its business, a region that if it is destabilized will completely and utterly destroy the Philippines economy. So it's unreal how they're going along with this, how they're pretending that this is a fruitful relationship with the Philippines, and not, again, just as you've been explaining, this is just a return to the age of imperialism. It's just being done camouflage with the modern Western democratic liberal spin, but it is still colonization. It is modern day empire.
Exactly. And thanks for the super chat, Mr. Friendly Guys. These idiots that tried to rename French fries into freedom fries. So no surprises they try and rename the seas. I mean, I was around during the Iraq War, and I remember when
Freedom
the
fries.
Americans were so angry with the French for not going along with them with the Iraq War, they renamed all of their French fries into freedom fries. I thought that was the most hilarious thing I've ever heard. And obviously, the French have been proved right, and the Americans have been proved wrong. So I have been to United States since then, and I think they have renamed it back now to French fries, which is good.
Yeah. I mean, it was never a serious thing, but it just goes to show how impulsive and childish the U.S. political system is. When Macron went to China and was talking about autonomy, basically an independent foreign policy for France that allows France to decide for itself. I saw Americans on TV, on Fox News, flipping out over the fact that the French want to have their own independent foreign policy and not be subordinated to the US. So they're angry about this, which in itself is an admission that this is true, that they are subordinated to the US. And you're angry that they want to have an independent foreign policy, and yet you're claiming that it's China that is the threat to everybody's freedom around the world, when in a very direct way, actually, you're admitting that the US is the one subjugating everyone and you're upset with these countries solely because they're not okay with that, and nor should they be okay with it.
Exactly. And it does sound to me that out of all the European countries, there's only one or two with true sovereignty. And I think France is one of them, because I don't think France has any US troops in its soil. I've not heard about it anyway. But I think France is one of them. Hungary is probably another, but Serbia maybe.
Yeah, Hungary, France, not really. I mean, they're not occupied by U.S. troops like so many other countries in Europe,
Mm,
but at the same time, they don't have an independent foreign policy. They do what the U.S. tells them to do, just like everyone else in Europe. And the few countries
yeah.
that don't, you will definitely hear about it. France is in trouble for just thinking about
Yeah.
not
And I
listening
think,
for.
yeah, I think not with the current leader, but I do remember France having an independent policy once upon a time.
Yeah.
Back then with Chirac and in the Iraq War, and also before that, I can't remember his name, but he was threatening to pull out of NATO as well. That great French president. Um, they named an arc after him, I think. I can't remember his name, but yeah, I think there was a few French presidents who were completely against Americanism. But unfortunately, the current one is a complete puppet, no spine whatsoever. So before I go to the next topic, I read another article that Marcus has actually gone back to China and tried to get some money out of them, because he he obviously realized Filipino needs money, it needs infrastructure. They need to help the economy. The United States is not going to do that, because this is why he went to the United States to basically negotiate with Biden, say, all right, we've given you these bases. What are you going to do for us? And Biden's pretty much turned around and said nothing. He's come back empty-handed from the United States. So yesterday I saw another article that Marcus wants to make another trip to China, and he says his agenda is going to try and get more investments, money, infrastructure, and apparently these stuff was promised by China to Duerte, and also promised to him in the first meeting. So he wants to kind of follow that on. So I don't know what China's going to think about it. They'll probably tell him to go away. Um, anyway, let's move on to the next one. And there's a story that United States has added 200 US troops to Taiwan. And yesterday, there was 25 defense contractors going into Taiwan. And these were some of the big names, defense contractors as well. Raytheon, one of them, which have been sanctioned by China. And it looks like United States is taking baby steps to pushing this war. They're taking baby steps. There's a lot of Fox News and CNN. They're all talking about a war with China, and they're all mentioning one date, which is 2027 for some reason. Every single article and every single video I watch, propaganda videos I watch, they all say it's going to be 2027. I don't know what's so special about 2027, to be honest. They must have something planned. And yeah, there seems to be taking baby steps. Yesterday, there was 100 troops in Taiwan. Today, there's 200 troops. Tomorrow, there might be 300. Day after, might be 400. This is what US likes to do. They like to take baby steps to push the boundaries as far as they can. And eventually, this is, you see the war with Ukraine and Russia. So they like to kind of push the boundaries as much as they can. They like to push the one China policy as much as they can. And this is like a very famous US trick. They've always done that as far as I can remember. What are your thoughts about this? And obviously, I think everybody in the US knows that it's inevitable that China will get into a war with the United States. But I just don't understand what benefit the United States can get from this, because their economy is absolutely in I mean, yesterday they've raised the interest rates, and immediately after they raised interest rates, two banks have pretty much fallen apart. and a couple of more banks are probably going to be going over the next week or so. The dollar index, the dollar's shooting downhill, which means the dollar doesn't really have much power anymore around the world. They have a debt ceiling, which they're going to hit by June, which is probably in a few weeks. The GDP figures came out as well, which was 1.1%. And not many people realize that their GDP figures, um, the only reason they had that 1.1% is because of inflation. There's no other reason, no manufacturing whatsoever. It's all speculation. So I just don't understand how they can pay for this war with China. It's not going to be another Iraq or another cheap war they can fight against Libya or Afghanistan. But this is China we're talking about, and you need a huge amounts of resources and money to fight a big war. And over Taiwan, I mean, I just don't understand why they've been so hawkish. What are your thoughts about this, Ryan?
We keep hearing the year 2025 to 2027. This is the window of opportunity that the United States has where it can fight an armed conflict with China and have some sort of optimal outcome for the United States. But if you read U.S. war planners, the papers that they put out examining potential conflict with China, even a so-called victory would leave tens of thousands of American service members dead. Ships sunk, including aircraft carriers, U.S. aircraft carriers, hundreds of planes shot out of the sky, their missile inventory entirely depleted, and it would scour the surface of Taiwan of all industry and infrastructure. Essentially, no more economy for Taiwan. And so the people there, their lives would be over, and that's what victory looks like. So what do you think defeat would look like? Why is the United States doing this? Why is the U.S. putting troops on Taiwan? A lot of people believe that Taiwan is an independent country, that China is bullying, and the U.S. is just helping them stand up to the bully. Back in reality, if you go to the U.S. State Department's official website and you read what their official stance is on Taiwan, they recognize Taiwan as part of China under the One China policy. And that is the way it has been since the 1970s. There's a One China policy that every country on earth adheres to one way or the other. Most countries, except for I think like 12 or 13 countries, their One China policy recognizes the government in Taipei, Taiwan, as the only legitimate ruling government of all of China, including mainland China, which is utterly absurd, which is why only 12 or 13 countries have that stance. The rest of them, including the US, the UK, all of Europe, Australia, Japan, everyone, absolutely everyone else, recognizes Taiwan as part of China and the People's Republic of China in Beijing as the sole legitimate government of all of China. And so what the US is doing by selling arms to Taiwan, by inviting members of the administration there to the United States on a more or less official visit, all but official visit, they're undermining their own agreement that they made with Beijing regarding the status of Taiwan, which is why China is upset. They are encroaching upon, infringing their sovereignty, and jeopardizing territorial integrity, which is a violation of the UN Charter. So we hear about the United States and its rules-based international order and upholding international law, and yet they are the ones actually breaking it. And that's why when we go back to talking about the Philippines and their Secretary of Foreign Affairs talking about international law and helping the U.S. uphold it in Asia, even though the U.S. isn't located in Asia, they're actually accomplices in undermining international law, and undermining Chinese sovereignty. Again, the Philippines' largest trade partner. Everyone in Asia's largest trade partner is China. Nations around the world, it's their largest trade partner. The U.S. is obsessed with hegemony over the entire globe. They do not see a future where China can be allowed to surpass the U.S. But this initial premise is entirely flawed. It is illogical. It is fantastical. It makes absolutely no sense. A country with 4 to 5 times the population of the U.S., a larger industrial base, nearly parity in terms of economics, and will surpass the U.S. economically, graduating millions more in fields like science, technology, engineering, mathematics, which contribute directly to their industrial base. Millions more than the US graduates each and every year. China will surpass the US. The US shouldn't even have a problem with this. It's irrational to see a larger, more populous, developed nation surpass you. Why is there a problem with that? It's because the US is obsessed with hegemony. So the ruling class of the United States has this irrational premise that they're building all of their foreign policy on top of, and that is what's going to lead them to a highly destructive war that even if they supposedly win, it's still going to be catastrophic for everyone involved, including the United States. And then where are they going to go from there? Do they honestly believe that they'll be able to rebuild faster than China will? I just don't. I don't. Again, it's completely irrational, which is why it makes no sense, but also why it's so dangerous.
Exactly. And I was reading the Global Times the other day, and sometimes I read it because it's quite interesting to see the Chinese side or Chinese take on things. And it was really they made an interesting point that it really doesn't matter how much weapons that Taiwan gets from the United States, because they're either going to end up in Chinese hands if they peacefully reunify, or they'll be destroyed if there is an out and out war within like minutes, because there is nothing that Taiwan can get which will enable them to win a war with China. I mean, you'll have missiles coming in from the mainland, you'll have missiles coming in from ships, you'll have missiles coming in from air, you know, everything will be taken out within the first hour. It really doesn't matter what weapons Taiwan gets, and like the Global Times said, they'll either be destroyed or they'll all end up in Chinese hands, like a transfer of technology, as they say. Um, yeah, it's just I just don't understand what they've got a proxy war going on with Russia right now, and things are escalating. Um, and and they are basically stopping money from going into Ukraine now. You can see a lot of people in Congress, and a few senators are standing up saying no more money for Ukraine. And now they're looking for the next big thing to entertain themselves, and they're looking at Taiwan. And everything you see in the news now is hardly anything about Ukraine anymore. Now you see Taiwan, now you see Philippines, you see South Korea, and they're really pushing that region now. And the Ukrainians and Zelensky is like, oh, hang on a second, what about us? Don't forget about us. And it's too late, because I think things have changed. They've stopped supplying. If you look at the support that the US and its allies gave to Ukraine last year, compare it to what they are doing now, it's like it's a big gap. Yes, last year they went all out, and now, oh, we'll give you a few million here, we'll give you a few million there, and that's it. And support for Ukraine is absolutely dead right now. And I think Zelensky is fed up flying all the way around the world, begging for money, begging for weapons. He's not getting. I think the EU gave some the other day, but the US is not giving enough. I mean, I think they gave like a few million here, a few million there. Most of it will end up back in the military industrial complex anyway. But yeah, it looks like they are focusing now on Taiwan. They've completely forgotten about Zelensky. And I'm hearing reports that Biden's told Zelensky to basically try and get some peace with Russia, find a way to get peace, and Zelensky, and even it's come to a point now where Poland feels that they need to kind of do something about it. And I'm also seeing reports there's 100,000 Polish troops on the border with Ukraine, and they're ready to do something unilaterally as well, without even NATO's approval, without US's approval. So things are really escalating in that region, and the United States has pretty much washed its hands of Ukraine and just looking for the next best thing. And there was another report I saw where one of the reasons I saw this report on CNN, and one of the senators was like, he was actively talking about destroying TSMC's factories if in the event of a war. And he said, "Oh, if if China dares to invade Taiwan, we will make sure those chips do not end up in Chinese hands." And the reporter was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, we will make sure we blow it up." And this came out all over the news. And the Taiwanese TSMC president, who actually runs the company, he came out with a statement saying, "Oh, you don't need to destroy our, you don't need to destroy our facilities and our factories, because, even if China gets hold of them, it's going to be very hard to produce chips, because obviously you need the skills, you need the supply chains and things like that. So there's no need to destroy it. Please don't destroy it."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's just hilarious reading that kind of stuff. What's your thoughts before we move on to the next topic?
Well, you started out talking about these weapons the U.S. is sending to Taiwan. It's U.S. government and arms industry funded think tanks that admit that the first phase of any fighting between Taiwan and the rest of China will result in the destruction of any warplanes or naval vessels that may be on or around Taiwan. They will be gone. And then when those are gone, you have your anti-ship missiles, but their range is further than shore-based radar, which might also be destroyed. So you're not going to have air or naval assets to do target acquisition. So they're going to be more or less useless. Plus, also they're land-based. They will be sitting targets also for China. China has a huge missile arsenal. They can scour the surface of Taiwan of all military anything militarily useful. They can impose a blockade by just destroying the ports and destroying any ships coming in or going out using their missiles, using submarines. They don't actually need to have their ships surrounding Taiwan and be targets for either Taiwan or U.S. anti-ship missiles. A lot of these think tanks admit that if there is any sort of conflict over Taiwan, the only way there's going to be an optimal outcome for the U.S. is if the U.S. intervenes immediately, completely and immediately. And that means that this is why they're putting more and more troops onto Taiwan incrementally. It's supposed to be a tripwire force. So that if anything happens on Taiwan, the U.S. can say, well, our troops are in danger. We have to do something immediately. We have to get involved immediately. So they're deliberately putting their own service members in danger as essentially bait to force the U.S. public to get behind a war with the rest of China over a conflict over Taiwan. And again, just keep in mind that this is all because the U.S. is violating its own agreement with Beijing over the status of Taiwan, and also violating international law. It's recognized by the UN as part of China also. So this is completely insane. And you're right. You're talking about how the U.S. has a proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, and they're trying to get this conflict going with China over Taiwan. They're out of time. They figured 20, 30 years ago, when the collapse of the Soviet Union, they could clear out all of these countries that were friendly with the Soviet Union or are friendly with China. They can clear them out, do a regime change, assert total control over the planet, divide, destroy Russia and China. And they've run out of time doing that. Russia has reemerged. China has risen. They're out of time. And so you have a completely irrational premise that is driving an agenda that has run out of time. So we see desperation, which, again, this is a nuclear armed superpower. That desperation translates directly into just absolute danger.
Yeah, thanks for that. And let's move on to the next topic, which is South Korea. And I'll obviously get started again, and I'll let you carry on. So last week, the president or prime minister of South Korea went to United States, and he was he actually made an absolute fool of himself, because there's hundreds of videos of him serenading Biden and his mates in the White House, singing to them. And this reminds me of when I was at school, and the bullies used to pick on these little Asian kids, and they used to get these Asian kids to stand up in front of the class. They used to get them to dance and sing for them to entertain them. If they don't, then they get bullied and get beaten up. So they had no choice. So this reminded me of Yoon standing up in front of Biden and his mates singing for them. I mean, you're not going to see President Xi doing that. You're not going to see Putin dancing and singing in front of Biden. You're not going to see any serious leader of any country singing like that. I mean, he's made an absolute fool of himself. Then he went. The funny thing was, he went to United States, and he came back absolutely empty-handed. Absolutely empty-handed. He went there to get some deals for South Korea, because South Korea is suffering a lot economically. So what he ended up doing is selling. Um, he's selling his countries. All of these companies basically agreed to set up shop in the United States. So Samsung and all of these other companies decided to build more, double down on building more factories, building more battery plants. Hyundai and Kia agreed to build more battery plants in the United States. Obviously, that benefits the United States because the workforce is in the United States, the expenses is in the United States, and the tax payments are going to be to the United States. So there's only one country that benefits when you have all these companies going to the United States and setting up shop there, and that's the United States. This is going to bring down the South Korean government even more. And one deal that he did get was Netflix. Apparently, Netflix going to invest 2 billion or something in South Korea. I mean, yeah, well done. You give away hundreds of billions of your private enterprises to United States, and you get 2 billion in return from Netflix. And also with his Chinese rhetoric, he's losing billions and billions of businesses with his largest trading partner, which is China. And not many people realize this, but South Korea had a trade surplus with China, for 10, 20 years. So this means that South Korea was selling more goods to China, making more money than China was selling to South Korea. So they were having a trade surplus. Most countries around the world have a trade deficit with China, which means they import more goods from China than they sell to China. But South Korea, for 20 years, they were having a very good relationship with China. They had a trade surplus. And over the last 3 months this year, suddenly this surplus has turned into a deficit. For the first time in the history of South Korea, they have a trade deficit with China in the first 3 months. So obviously with this anti-Chinese rhetoric, it's not really helping the South Korean companies and South Korean businesses in China. And this is causing a huge economic strain on the country. And what does it do? He goes to United States, sings for the president, sells his private businesses to the United States, and just to make matters worse, he agrees a deal with the United States where they would place nuclear submarines in bases in South Korea. And this is completely against the non-proliferation treaty and against international law, by the way, because if China and Russia decide to do that with Cuba or Nicaragua, for example, park their nuclear submarines there, what do you think the United States would do then? So what are your thoughts on this? And again, looks like South Korea has sold its soul to the devil, and they are heading the same way Filipino is, Japan is, and Ukraine, in completely capitalizing themselves to the United States and sacrificing the whole population. What's your thoughts on this?
I think you laid it out very well. This is another example of a nation whose political structures, because they are obsessed with the notion of keeping Western-style democracy, which, as I've explained, is a system of control the U.S. uses to control other nations, to impose itself and its will on these other nations. South Korea is making decisions that don't benefit South Korea, actually are made at the detriment of South Korea, and they only serve Washington. This Chip 4 alliance, people have heard about this. South Korea is a party of that. They were dragged kicking and screaming into it. No one in the Chip 4 alliance actually benefits except for the United States. They're essentially telling all of these countries, you're making billions doing business with China. Stop doing business with China. Give us all of your trade secrets. And that's basically it. And they're like, why would we agree to that? And they're like, well, because we have tens of thousands of troops stationed in your country. Yeah. And we play a huge role in either maintaining stability by us not doing anything, or creating instability by creating provocations, which we're very good at doing. And so this is not a series of alliances the U.S. has in Asia. It is a series of hostage crises. South Korea, Japan, the Philippines now, they're trying to transform nations here in Southeast Asia, well, aside from the Philippines, into a similar situation where there's a client regime installed into power that completely makes decisions against the best interests of that country for Washington at the expense of the people in that country and their collective future. So with South Korea, and people don't realize this, but South Korea, Japan, they do a huge amount of trade. With China, we're told that they're somehow enemies, but they do so much trade with each other. And China is one of their largest, if not their largest, trade partner, depending on whether you're talking exports, imports. So why are they making these deals with the U.S. to create hostility? They're parking these nuclear submarines in ports in South Korea. For what purpose? We're told, well, it's because South Korea wanted to develop nuclear weapons to counter the threat of North Korea. But we all know that those U.S. nuclear submarines are there for China. Yep. U.S. troops are there for China. And when you listen to U.S.-based experts, pro-Western experts talk about this deal, they admit that all it's going to do is force North Korea to escalate in terms of its own nuclear weapons program. So how did you what did you do by doing that? Did you make things more stable, or did you destabilize everything? And they did this on purpose, because instability on the Korean Peninsula is the justification for keeping tens of thousands of U.S. troops there, which are there actually to contain China. And the same goes for Japan. The U.S. keeps their troops there in Japan, and they force the Japanese government to make problems with both North Korea and China, and anywhere else they can convince them to create problems, so that they constantly have this justification for keeping U.S. troops there. We're there to protect the Japanese. That's what we say. When in reality, we're there as part of this hostage situation. It's literally a gun to their head, essentially. So you're looking at all of this. I want to get back to President Yoon singing for President Biden. And I saw a commentary in the Western media, the U.S. media, about this. And I saw some professor at some U.S. university talking about how this illustrates that it's not just a practical partnership between the U.S. and South Korea, which, as you can see, it is not a partnership at all. It is subordination. They said this also shows the cultural and the special relationship between South Korea and the United States. What it actually signifies is the type of Asia that the U.S. likes: a subordinated, obedient Asia, eager to please the white Western world. That's what this is all about. That's what it's always been about. That's what it's about now. That's why when you see people who are anti-China, they hate the Chinese people. Any Chinese person, any Asian person, they're racist. They hate Asian people. They like Taiwanese people because they're, the people who are on board with the anti-rest of China. They like them because they're obedient and they're dependent on the West. That's why they like them. That's why they like the Japanese. That's why they like the South Koreans. And anytime we see someone on Taiwan or in Japan or in South Korea who starts thinking for themselves and speaking up for themselves, oh, we have a problem here. We have someone who's being undemocratic, who's being a problem, and who's being paid by the Chinese or something like that. And these are people who are just seeking a truly independent foreign policy that serves their best interests versus serving U.S. interests at their own expense.
That's right, Brian. And the last president I thought was pretty good. Well, he's a prime minister. I think his name was Moon. And I thought he was quite good, balancing ties between the US and China. And he would never fall out of line, or he would always try and balance things. And I thought he did a good job. So it's not a hard thing to do, just to stay neutral. It can be done. And I think Moon proved that. But this guy, Yoon, not only did he go to the United States and sing in front of Biden, you're not going to see Biden going to South Korea and start singing to Yoon. I mean, that's it's only done by the Asian man. Asian man has to go entertain his white masters. So he came out really, really bad. And not only that, Yoon is actually called a traitor in South Korea. His approval rating is in the 30s, is just as bad as Biden. And the reason his approval rating is so low is he's basically forgiven the Japanese for annexing Korea and all of the crimes that Japan did and stuff like that. And he came on record to say, we should forgive Japan for what they did 100 years ago. 100 years ago is a long time, and I'm just asking, should we forgive the NAZIs for what they did to the Jews? And these things are very, very, very important. And again, he was seen bowing to the Japanese flag. And just before his trip, he went to before his trip to the United States, he mentioned the Taiwan question as well. He said Taiwan is not a Chinese issue; this is a world issue. And he also angered the Russians as well. He said, "Oh, we're going to give weapons to Ukraine."
Yeah.
And then Russia came back, said, if you give Russian weapons to Ukraine, we're going to give weapons to North Korea. So he's angered Russians, he's angered the Chinese, he's angered his own people. He's even angered the Japanese, because there's another story yesterday that some of his foreign ministers have been seen in some disputed islands between Japan and Korea, and they are like walking around with Korean flags on their backs, and which insulted the Japanese. So this guy is running out of friends, and yet he's going to be remembered, in history as the Asian leader who was singing and entertaining Biden and complete puppet. And it just goes to show what a great job that Moon did before him, who actually did keep a really good balancing act between China and United States. But this guy has gone
And
completely 180. Sorry, go on.
and he was also making progress in easing tensions between South and
Yes,
North Korea.
that's
They
right.
were making major unprecedented progress, and
Yeah.
now it's all being destroyed because of this nuclear sub deal. Which that was the whole purpose of doing this, was to stop South Korea was very slowly, incrementally sneaking out from under U.S. hegemony, and this nuclear sub deal is meant to forcefully put them back under it, keep the threat of North Korea visible, force them back into obedience to Washington, and literally having their president sing for Biden in Washington. Utterly disgraceful.
Yeah, exactly. And anybody that knows military, I'm talking about my followers and everyone that's listening to our show right now. We all have intelligent people here, and United States does not need to park its nuclear subs in South Korea. They can fire nuclear weapons from the Pacific, right? So if there's a nuclear war in Korea, if North Korea starts firing nuclear weapons into the South, United States does not need to be parked in the ports of South Korea for them to retaliate. They can retaliate from the Pacific Sea or the Japanese Sea, or some of the other military bases they have around. So, this parking of the submarine in South Korea is just a show, really. It's nothing different. Things are not different from what they were yesterday. I mean, if there was a nuclear exchange between North Korea and South Korea, there was United States subs. They can easily retaliate from them from any location. So that is not a deterrence. In fact, this is going to push, like you said, North Korea to build more nukes. This is going to push them to build even nuclear subs. This is going to push them to, point more missiles at South Korea. And this is going to push them away from the negotiating table. And like you said, Moon did a lot of good work getting North Korea closer to the negotiating table. And looks like this new guy has completely destroyed it. And he goes all the way to America to ask if South Korea can build its own nuclear weapons, and obviously, United States told him no. What we're going to do for you instead, we'll park our nuclear subs in some of your ports. And he's like, yeah, okay, that's fine, that's perfect. But it's a token gesture. It's not really even needed, because you don't really need to park nuclear subs in South Korean ports, because the whole point of nuclear subs is for you to retaliate, but you don't know where these subs are. I mean, if you park them in South Korean ports, they're obviously going to be taken out straight away, right? So the whole point. I mean, it's not really something that he got in return. This was already there in place anyway. I mean, nuclear subs are always like going around those waters, and they all have nuclear arms in them. So any kind of escalation in that area, you would guarantee that United States will retaliate in some sort. And again, having nuclear subs in around that area is not going to affect the United States. The only countries this is going to affect is South Korea. So if things escalate in that region, there's only one country that would be destroyed, and that's South Korea, because that's right in the middle of North Korea, China, and Russia. All three are nuclear countries. So if this guy Yoon is going around insulting the Chinese, insulting the Russians, insulting the North Koreans, I mean, what does he think he is? And he's right
It,
in the middle of
it,
three nuclear powers.
it's just so sad to see, and it's just like you say, because of Western style democracy, which again, it's not really democracy. You have all of this progress that was made previously. It's all wiped out. Everything is set back, and it will take years to undo the damage being done right now. And we all know that once the U.S. is dug in like a parasite, it's very difficult to get them out, if it is even possible to get them out. And another thing, I think people should look into the details of this sub deal as deeply as we're able to, because there's a possibility that they're just they're creating the infrastructure to support a U.S. sub force from South Korea, which again just gives them the ability to use this force against China. I mean, that's the whole point of it. And everything you're saying about a nuclear deterrence is utterly correct. It is completely correct. They're not going to be launching nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles from South Korean ports. It makes no sense at all, and they don't need to be in the port. These missiles are able to go huge distances. So it makes no sense at all, except as a deliberate provocation.
Exactly. And I just can't believe what I saw when I woke up one morning and I put the news on, and I just saw him singing in front of Biden, and Biden's so happy and waving his arms in the air, and all of his friends, they're all cheering him on, cheering the little Asian guy, and this was done on purpose. I mean, when I watched the clip again, Biden had a microphone in his hand, and he gave this microphone to President Yoon. He said, "I heard you can sing for us." So it's not something that Yoon went there to do. This is something that Biden pushed him to do, and everyone that's kind of watching, it must be so embarrassing if you're a South Korean. This is like, going all the way to the United States and Biden asking you to sing and dance for them.
The
Oh,
president of
yeah,
South Korea. Very embarrassing.
it must be so embarrassing. Anyway, let's move on. I wanted to talk a bit about the South Korean economy. You mentioned the Chip 4 alliance, and I also wanted to kind of add on a few things as well. China has stopped buying $300 billion worth of chips from South Korea. And this was as a result from the Chip 4 alliance. So there was a lot of articles coming out saying they were basically forbidding South Korea to sell advanced chips to China. And China, in return, stopped buying chips from South Korea. and 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 South Korea lost a huge amount of business. We're talking about $300 billion worth of chips. And this was given South Korea the trade surplus that they wanted. And now, because China's not buying these chips anymore from South Korea, now they're in deficit. Most of these chips were basically mature chips, because when you have electric cars, for example, they don't need the latest chips, which are 5 nanometers. You can do with 28 nanometers chips, and so China has got they basically can produce those 28 nanometers themselves. They don't really need chips from South Korea. Plus, every year that goes by, China has more and more capacity to build these chips and get them more advanced year by year. So it's only South Korea that's losing. They're losing this business. Other things that they are losing is, I've also read an article that South Korea used to be the #1 shipbuilding country in the world for the last 10 years. And now this shipbuilding industry has been taken over by China. And now China is building these huge LNG tankers. They're building these huge cruise ships as well. And they have taken a lot of business away from South Korea when it comes to shipbuilding. And cars is another thing as well. The Chinese do not want South Korean cars anymore. China have got their own, obviously EV cars, and they're taking a lot of business from South Korean companies. So things are changing, really. It doesn't really make sense why you would kind of escalate things and make things more difficult for you as a country and your businesses with China when you have basically a literal border between yourselves and China. I mean, obviously not touching China's borders, but just across the Bohai Sea, which will take a ship maybe an hour to go from South Korea to the ports of China. It doesn't make sense why you would insult your biggest trading partner, your neighbor, just to trade with the United States, or Japan, which is much far further away. Just the people that running these countries, they just have no geopolitics sense or any sense of geography or being good neighbors. I just don't understand how these leaders are put into place and completely selling off their country, and and they're getting away with it. What's your thoughts about all this? I know I made a lot of points there.
Well, again, I mean, even for the chips that China is not able to produce itself, that if you stop selling it to them, they're buying it from you because it's cheaper and easier to buy it because you've already developed it. But does anyone honestly believe a country that's graduating millions of engineers, scientists, mathematicians, and designers, do they honestly believe that they're not capable of developing this capability themselves? If you're not giving it to them and they need it, they are going to invest the money, the time, and the energy to develop it. They've proven this over and over again. And so you're just hurting yourself. And again, it all goes back to the United States pursuing an entirely irrational foreign policy that it then imposes on all of these other nations that it has politically captured. It's not that it makes any sense for South Korea to be doing this. It makes absolutely no sense for South Korea to be doing this. But because they've been captured politically by the US, they can get the government to make decisions that completely destroy their industry, their economy. Their companies are hemorrhaging billions of dollars. They're losing billions of dollars in sales doing business with China. They were very happy doing that business with China. There were no problems doing business with China. The only problem is the U.S. wants to isolate China, so they've convinced the South Koreans to do it just in the government, not in the industry. The industry, again, they are against this. They are fighting against this. They just, their collective power compared to Washington and Wall Street is just so much smaller. So they're unable to assert their interests. And so you're watching that happen to South Korea. The same thing is happening to Japan. Taiwan trying to spite the rest of China to please Washington because, again, this political capture in Taipei, they're going to hurt their economy also. So they're all going to lose. And does anyone honestly believe this incremental process of trying to isolate China, that China is not going to innovate and make up for these things they're trying to cut China off from? Anyway, they're demonstrably doing it. So it makes no sense, but that's because the initial premise of the US maintaining hegemony over the entire planet and not allowing a larger country like China to surpass it, it makes no sense at all. So everything that follows is completely irrational. And then at the end of the line, when you finally reach South Korea being forced to adopt these policies, they're destroying themselves. We're watching it unfold, unfortunately.
Exactly. And I mentioned in point number 17, this is very similar to the South Korean Plaza Accord when, I don't know if you remember when Japan did a Plaza Accord agreement with the United States in the 1980s. Their economy has not grown since then. Absolutely destroyed their own economy to help the United States. It looks like South Korea is doing the same thing. We're going to move on now. So Nuland has been spotted in Mongolia, and I want to tell you a story which I've been doing some background research on this. So she's been spotted in Mongolia, and Mongolia is a big seller of coal and natural resources to China. And after her trip, Mongolia cancelled or they unilaterally tore up some agreements that were selling Mongolian coal going into China and other agreements. They unilaterally tore them up. And China was obviously not very happy about this because obviously it looks like the United States has completely encircled China now. Now it's getting its fingers dirty in Mongolia. And then China cancelled the agreement with Mongolian coal, and now what China had to do is they had to talk with Australia again, and now they are importing Australian coal because of this, and so obviously Australian coal was banned for a few years because there was a trade deal because of what Scott Morrison was saying and doing, and they broke off all relations with Australia during his time. But it looks like things are getting back to normal with Australia. Obviously, still not there yet with AUKUS and stuff going on. But in terms of trade, things looks like it's getting better. So it looks like Mongolia now is going along with the West. And again, you see all of these countries that are surrounding China, like Mongolia, South Korea, Japan, Philippines. And yeah, it's just I'm just finding it absolutely hilarious how you as a country will allow Newland to come in and dictate terms and destroy your relationships with your neighbor, and especially after what she's done with Ukraine. And have you read much about Mongolia? Have you seen much about this article or?
Well, if you remember, a couple of months ago, there were actually protests in Mongolia, and it was very bizarre because it was over coal, and they were saying there's all this corruption, our money's being stolen, and China's involved somehow. And you're just thinking, like, for the average person living in Mongolia, do they care about what's going on with the coal? Is this a thing that ordinary Mongolians are just going to come out of their houses and spontaneously start protesting about? Absolutely not. Had all the hallmarks of a US-sponsored color revolution. And sometimes these color revolutions aren't necessarily for regime change. They're meant to pressure and coerce the sitting government. The sitting government might even be a client regime aligned with the US, but they're not ready to shoot themselves in the other foot. They already shot themselves once. They don't want to shoot both feet. They want to at least be able to limp across the room on their own. And so the color revolution is there to convince them, no, you have to shoot yourself in both feet. So as it's hard to tell, there's another reason they might be trying to stir up trouble in Mongolia. The Power Siberia 2 pipeline, I do believe it has to go through Mongolia. So that's something they're very interested to prevent from happening. They'll do virtually anything to stop it. At the end of the day, Mongolia is surrounded by Russia and China. It's a landlocked nation, and almost all of its trade is done with Russia or China, one or the other. And so it would be utter suicide for Mongolia to go along with the US on anything. And I think there will be red lines that both Russia and China draw together and enforce together if the US pushes this too far. And the US is constantly doing things like this where they think they're making this master chess move. And what they do is they just force Russia and China closer together, and their cooperation closer together, and their cooperation on a much higher level than they would have been able to justify working on previously. So again, it's just more of the US painting itself into the corner, so desperate it'll try almost anything to try to hurt I mean, with Mongolia, you're hurting both Russia and China by creating problems there. That's what they think. But in actuality, I think it'll leave Russia, China, and Mongolia stronger in the end.
Yeah, that's right. One thing I never understood about Mongolia is how can a country with 3 million people, we're talking about just 3 million people, have a country so large as Mongolia? Mongolia is just as big as India if you look at the landmass itself. And obviously, most of it is desert, but the whole point is they have a huge landmass with a very small amount of people and literally no army as well. They've got no army. So the station between China and Russia, and historically it used to be part of China. I think if you go back in the historical maps, it used to be part. But yeah, I think, and also the Mongols were from there, the Genghis Khan, and so obviously Mongolia has got a big history. But I just don't understand how a country with 3 million people, what's happening around the world, especially with Ukraine and stuff, and then you're like, you let Nuland into your country, shake hands with the devil, and then now you're destroying trade deals that you made with China, and you're unilaterally, tearing up trade deals. And who else are you going to trade with if you're not trading with China, if you're not trading with Russia? Because you're a landlocked country, and you're going to have, if you want to trade with the United States, how are you going to get to the United States? You've got no access to ports. You have to go through China, right? Or you have to go through Russia. And I just don't understand the thinking behind some of these Mongolian leaders and even like general leaders around the world. Um,
Well,
yeah, go on.
if I can, the United States has invested tremendously in a global network of administrative control for what is essentially its empire, its global empire. It has a pipeline in terms of education, training programs, forums that pull these people in, indoctrinate them, deeply indoctrinate them, get them networked in with the West, make them think that they are part of the West. And they will do almost anything to stay in that club, even if it is irrational and self-destructive. And we've watched this over and over again, whether it's in Latin America, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, for example, it's a good example, Taiwan, the administration there in Taipei, and also certain leaders in Mongolia. They're poisoned with this indoctrination through education, through these forums. They think they're part of the club. They get emails and they do workshops with, say, the NED, and they think, wow, I'm special. They want me, but actually they want you because you're foolish enough to go along with it and destroy your own country in the process. That's the reality. There's people like that in every country where their hungry ego cannot be fed through their own merit. And so the US comes in, identifies these people specifically, and feeds that starving ego through essentially a deal where they are obedient and infect the levers of power in their particular country and do their bidding. And then they feed their ego. They get them in Newsweek. They get them at these workshops. They let them travel to Europe and attend these forums and stay at a 5-star hotel. This is how empire has kind of, it has its military to force people to coerce. It has its sanctions and everything, but there's also this soft power mechanism that they've developed over decades. That it's very effective, especially when you target the right people, these weaker people who cave in and go along with it.
Exactly. And I also want to move on to Vietnam. And I've been talking a lot of negative things about a lot of these countries surrounding China, but Vietnam is actually looks like they got their head screwed on correct. Blinken was there recently, and I found it really hilarious that Blinken was insulted right under his nose. Now, I don't know if you've seen the video or the pictures. The United States and the Vietnamese were talking to each other in this room. And if you notice the background, you will see the Vietnamese flag on the Vietnamese side, but there was no American flag on the American side because the Vietnamese refused to put up an American flag in that room. And obviously Blinken wasn't very happy about it, but they had no choice basically. And so all of these kind of CNN and all these pictures were coming up all over the internet and all of these websites. Nobody picked up the fact that the American flag was missing from the background when they were taking pictures, and it was only the Chinese articles that picked it up. I mean, I saw it in Global Times saying, Blinken was humiliated in Vietnam, and it looks like Vietnam are doing things right. They've agreed with China with a high-speed rail that's going to go all throughout Vietnam and link to the Chinese railway system. That's obviously going to help the economy. Everyone knows that Vietnam and China, they don't really get along that well. They've had a war in the past, but at least Vietnam is still, you know, behaving the right way when it comes to diplomacy and foreign affairs and things like that. They're not escalating things, and I mean that's probably one way to run your country. But I think the only difference between Vietnam and the rest of these countries is that Vietnam is still a communist country, and the rest of them are pretty much democracies, and that's probably why United States has not been able to get its claws into Vietnam like they have with other countries. Um, yeah, do you want to say anything about Vietnam before I move on? Or
Sure, sure. China is building infrastructure projects inside of Vietnam. They built metro rail for cities in Vietnam. They also gave Vietnam access to European markets through their China-Europe rail line. So Vietnam is actually connected to that rail line that allows companies to export goods from Vietnam through China across Eurasia to Europe. Essentially, that's what is going on. So they're doing a lot of business, huge amount of trade. Again, China is their largest trade partner. Vietnam does this balancing act that a lot of other countries in Southeast Asia also do. Thailand does it. But I think you're right. The political system, not necessarily because it's communist, but because they don't have this Western style democracy that allows the US to basically build up their own political party to run in elections. There is none of that in Vietnam. So you're right. They cannot sink their claws in. They can do that in Thailand. So even though Thailand and Vietnam have a very similar approach, balancing their ties between the U.S. and China to get the best for their own best interests, Thailand has this toxic Western-style democracy that has allowed the U.S. to create multiple opposition parties that run in elections, every general election, and could potentially take over the country, take any policy that is bringing Thailand forward into the future, spin it around and drive the country right into the ground. So that is where Vietnam and Thailand differ. That's where Vietnam has the advantage. And I just wish that eventually, because Thailand, Vietnam, even the Philippines are all part of ASEAN. I wish ASEAN would get together and really have a serious discussion about foreign interference in their collective internal affairs, respective and collective internal political affairs, and that they would start working on that to purge this element of coercion and interference from from this sphere that is ASEAN. I think it would do everyone a lot of good. It would reduce the amount of conflict, and it would improve relations, ties, and progress for everybody involved.
yeah, correct. And I think that's going to take a bit of time because Southeast Asia was always a vessel of the United States, and this goes back to kind of Japanese colonization of Southeast Asia, and back then when United States drove out the Japanese, they took over most of Southeast Asia, and then you had Vietnam and Indonesia and all these other countries that were called Indochina, which was taken over by the French. And these are all colonized countries. I think a lot of them are coming out of colonization, and they're getting their, feet kind of sorted. And a lot of these countries in ASEAN are still poor. Also, Cambodia, Laos, even Philippines, Malaysia, they're still very poor compared to the West. I think it's going to take a bit of time for them to build up their economies, be strong. I think once you build up your economy, have a you are kind of rich, you do have more of a say when it comes to foreign policy. You have more independence. When you are poor, you really don't have much choice. It seems like it's very easy for United States to come over, and promise you the world and stuff, give you a bit of money, and that's it. You kind of sold your soul to the devil. But I think once you have money, I think it does give you choices, not only when if you're running a country, but also in life as well. It gives you choices. But I think this trade deal that's happening, RCEP, I think that's going to help ASEAN build up its wealth and economy over the next decade or so. They are still much richer than they were 10 years ago. So they are gone way ahead of what they were 10, 20 years ago. I think back then, after the Vietnam War, the whole region was kind of destroyed, wasn't it? I mean, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, these countries were absolutely destroyed. And so it's taken a bit of time for them to kind of recover. But yeah,
Oh, well,
you go on, sorry.
there's that, and then there's also the fact that the U.S. and Europe, they have deliberately tried to get into the political systems of all of these countries and perpetuate conflict and prevent
Yeah.
reconstruction. So for Laos, I remember traveling to Laos many times, and for decades, there was the Vietnam War. They destroyed Laos. They dropped more bombs on Laos than there are actually people living in Laos.
Yep.
And there's more unexploded ordnance still lying around waiting to kill people in Laos than there are actually people in Laos. And I remember traveling to the capital, Vientiane, and it just looked like a sleepy, dirty, rundown Thai village. It didn't even look like the capital city.
Mm.
But as China began rising and then doing business with other nations in the region, they were bringing all of these other nations up with them. So they went into Laos. It's a landlocked country. They went in there and they built its first major highways. So instead of taking windy roads through the mountains, incredibly dangerous, inefficient, it takes 3 days to go from Kunming to Vientiane, the capital. They cut that down to 24 hours with proper highways. Now they have a high-speed rail running through Laos from Kunming to Vientiane, right up to the border with Thailand, and you can transfer people and goods to the Thai rail network right across the border to continue onward to the rest of Southeast Asia. And actually, that high-speed rail line is meant to continue into Thailand. It's under construction, but again, because Thailand has Western-style democracy, there's an election this month, actually, and there's the possibility that the U.S. client regime is going to get into power. They've openly expressed their intention to cancel the high-speed rail project and replace it with the Hyperloop, which doesn't even exist. It's science fiction right now at the moment. So this is the problem. It's not that they burned everything to the ground during the Vietnam War and it's taking a while to get back up onto their feet. There's been an active campaign across the entire region by the U.S. and its allies to keep it down, to prevent them from rebuilding. Myanmar, I saw someone in the comment section asking about Myanmar. The U.S. and the British used to be a British colony. They have invested from its independence after World War II all the way up until now, invested in all of these ethnic armed groups to keep them fighting and killing each other so that the country can never unify and can never build a proper centralized government, economy, and then do business with its neighbors. And China's in there trying to build infrastructure, and the U.S. is arming and funding militant groups to literally just blow it up as they build it. So this is where we are. This is where the battle lines are drawn. It's between the U.S. bombing and blowing everything up and China trying to build faster than the U.S. can destroy things.
Yeah, that's right. And somebody also mentioned Agent Orange, and I just think it's so evil what United States did to Vietnam. I mean, fine, you lost the war, leave the country, but why carpet the whole country with Agent Orange and carpet bombing? They just wanted to make sure that country was completely sent to the dark ages that they would never recover from, and it was just a really evil thing to do. And obviously Vietnam has come a long way since then, and they've built up the economy, and now it's a great, I don't know if you've been to Vietnam, but I've been there once, and it's a great country. It's lots of it's quite beautiful, and people are friendly, and lots of things to do. But yeah, it's crazy. So evil what the Americans did to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. They did it for one reason. They just wanted to annihilate not just the country but the people as well. They wanted to, yeah, fine, you lost the war, but don't kind of destroy the whole country when you're leaving.
It's
And it's just
it's the American way. It's the American way.
yeah, it's just really sad. But you're right about if all of the ASEAN countries get together, build up their economy, um, America's influence in that region is going to become less and less and less. They cannot be seen around the South China Sea because if all the countries kind of get together and kind of and they kind of all monitor the South China Sea together, that could be that could be done as well. They don't need the US to be in those waters or in
No,
that area.
yeah, absolutely not. It's a maritime dispute. It's a genuine maritime dispute, but all nations with access to the sea have maritime disputes with one another.
Yeah.
Even in Europe, they have pretty heated disputes where they've got boats trying to block harbors and the respective navies get involved, but they're just maritime disputes. The US is inserting itself into local limited maritime disputes that are always worked out bilaterally, no matter how heated they get. The U.S. is inserting itself into this maritime dispute or series of disputes, and it's trying to escalate them into a regional or global conflict. That's what the U.S. is doing. So they're not there as mediators. They're there as a catalyst to create the biggest possible conflict that they can. It's whatever they're saying. It's the exact opposite. That's what they're actually doing in reality. The exact opposite of whatever they're saying.
Yeah, and I just find it hilarious that United States has done everything they can to destroy these countries, and now they're going back there on asking for their help to go against China. And I just find that absolutely
So
hilarious.
yeah. They're going to Southeast Asia that they've destroyed, and even though they had their military in Thailand, that really, again, there was no alliance or a partnership there. They were given no choice. They just said, "Look, if you don't let us put our military base here, we'll put it somewhere else, and we'll bomb you also, along with everyone else." So what they did was, yes, they've destroyed them all, and now they're saying, "Look, work with us so we can destroy China, and then China will be gone, and you will be isolated by yourselves. You will be weak because we just made you fight this proxy war, and then it'll be even easier for us to subjugate you as well. We'll finish what we started back in the 60s and 70s." And so that's what US foreign policy is. It's about hegemony, and anyone who thinks otherwise, any one of these people in one of these countries, anywhere, who think they actually have a seat at the table, you don't. You're not even going to be allowed in the room to eat the scraps off the floor. You're going to be out tied to the tree in the back. That's where you will be. And that's what people need to understand. There is no place for you at the table of a unipolar, rules-based international order led by the US. Multipolarism, by definition, means everyone has a seat at the table. People need to start understanding this. They need to start investing in multipolarism. They need to do something about these people in their country that have been bought off by the US and who are running the country into the ground. They really need to get serious about it. It's not something you can just keep ignoring or not. You don't want to confront the US. You have to do something. It's like a cancer. It's going to just continuously spread, work deeper and deeper. And then the longer you wait to dig it out, the harder it's going to be when you finally have to. And you're going to have to.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. And just going along your point, and you're 100% right. And those who don't believe what you've said, you're welcome to Google the picture of the G7. And the G7 is a group of countries that come together. And one of the countries is Japan. And if you ever Google, pictures of the G7 together, they always group the kind of they always group the kind of what would you say? What do you say? The important white countries, and they always put the Asian country right at the back. So the Japanese is always at the back, or always like significant away from the picture, and it's only the main guys at the top, which doesn't make any sense because out of the G7, Japan has got the second largest economy after the United States, so they should be standing at the front with the United States, right? But no, you basically have Trudeau standing at the front. You have Boris Johnson standing at the front. Who these two countries have no say in what goes on in the rest of the world.
I'm actually doing it. You're right. He's in the back row. He's an honorary member.
Yeah,
If
he's
only
right
if
in the
only
back
his
row.
eyes looked a little bit different and his skin was a little whiter, maybe he could get it. Even though again, like you say, his economy is number 2, but somehow he's sitting in the back row, and it just goes to show you, people get angry at me for pointing this out. Western foreign policy is racist. It is inherently racist. They believe in Western superiority, and they believe in the superiority of white Western culture, systems, institutions. It's something that is rooted all the way back into classical imperialism, where they saw everyone as barbarians, and they still do. They just dress it up a little, and people get confused where you have these social tensions the U.S. deliberately creates within its own population, where everything is labeled racist, even when it obviously isn't. And they confuse that with the actual real racism rooted deeply in U.S. foreign policy. Just think about President Joe Biden saying China is not allowed to, will not surpass the U.S. during his presidency. Why not? They have more people, a bigger industrial base, all of these things that I constantly list over and over again. Why won't they pass? Why won't they surpass the U.S.? What about them makes them somehow, and despite having all of these advantages, what is it about them that for some reason means they still, for some reason, can't surpass the U.S.? And the answer is they're not white. That's the answer.
Yeah, exactly. We're running out of time, Brian. So
Sure,
we're gonna.
it's 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good conversation. 2 hours.
Yeah, we'll end it there.
We got all the way to the end. I can't see because what's at the
Oh
end of the
yeah,
list
so let
after
me hide
Vietnam.
that. Yeah, I think the last bits were just about the economy, U.S. economy, but we'll leave that for another day. Because
Yeah,
the U.S. economy will always it's always bad. The world economy, everything's going down, de-dollarization and stuff. So we'll leave that for another day, or we'll talk about something else. I think one thing I do want to talk about with you in the future is what happens with the Thai election, and
sure.
if that guy who wants the hyperloop instead of high-speed rail.
It's funny because the opposition that wants to get into power, there's two main parties. They're both run by billionaires. They both openly work together. The reason there's two parties is because of legal and strategic political reasons. They have two parties to increase their chances of reaching different types of voters, and they will gut this country and wreck it if they're able to. And the problem is that ordinary Thai people that are not going to vote for the opposition, unfortunately, a lot of people will, because they have complete control over the media here, just from top to bottom. But the silent majority don't agree with them, or if they do vote for them, it's because they promised all these ridiculous handouts that they'll never deliver. But the silent majority are just want to be left alone. They will come out like a swarm of hornets when there is a crisis, but before things get pretty bad, before that happens. It's unfortunate that Thailand is trapped in this cycle because it's going to set back development by years and years. The high-speed rail project should have been done already, but you got Thanaton and his political party and these U.S.-funded fake NGOs going from village to village, teaching them how to make a problem with the government to try to extract more money, because they're building a rail line, so they need to acquire the land along the route. So they're just trying to slow it down as much as possible, and they're pretending that they care about the people, but really their whole goal is to sabotage the high-speed rail project. Thanaton literally traveled to the U.S. in I believe it was 2018, a year before the general election in 2019. He had a U.S. lobbyist. The lobbyist had to file a Foreign Agents Registration Act document, and they showed everyone that was on the itinerary. It was U.S. State Department officials, USAID, Freedom House, which is a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy. He lost the general election. His party got disbanded because he gave them a donation, hundreds million, over 100 million baht donation, which is completely illegal. And he knew it was illegal, but he did it anyway. So then he was out protesting. The U.S. didn't get the election results that they wanted, so they put him out at the head of the protests. And the NED, who he was visiting representatives of in Washington, they helped fund and organize them. And they've been going on from 2019 all the way up until now. And now there's the possibility that these people might actually get into power because, again, the U.S. invests millions. Americans have no idea, millions and millions of dollars of American taxpayer dollars into the media, into the political system, into the education system here in Thailand to do to Thailand what they've admittedly done and are proud of that they've done to the Philippines. Just create indoctrinated, brainwashed people that will be in the government and serve U.S. interests. That's what they're trying to do here. And it's a tragedy because Thailand is the only country in Southeast Asia that was never colonized by Western powers. And yet they're attempting to do it, but by other means now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it'll be quite interesting to see what happens to Thailand when these guys come into power. And I'm sure it'll be an interesting read. And I'm not sure how China would also react as well, because I believe those high-speed rails are almost complete. They've already started building them. I think there's some of them. Some of the lines.
They've built and completed the Grand Central Station that will be the terminal for the first leg of the high-speed rail. So, who knows? Again, like the last time a U.S.-backed client regime was in power was from 2011 to 2014, and they wrecked the country. Thailand was the top rice exporter on earth, and they destroyed the entire rice industry. And it still hasn't recovered from that. That was years and years ago. So what are they going to do this time? This is my point, is that Western-style democracy is not a process of self-determination. It is a process of U.S. interference all around the globe. It is the medium that the U.S. uses to control nations around the world. And it is a huge problem. And it is so hard to even talk to people about why it is a problem, because they're so brainwashed into thinking democracy is great.
Anyway, thanks for your time, Brian. Really appreciate it. Thanks everyone that was listening today. I think we reached over 1,000 views at one point, and obviously we are quite long today, 2 hours 21. So probably a lot of them got fed up or got bored listening to me. But thanks for everyone that's hanged on so far and listened to our full stream. I really appreciate the loyalty. Really appreciate you guys. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the show. And we will probably do this again sometime. I'll have to see when I get time again, and I'll obviously invite Brian, and I'll try and invite others as well. We'll try and do this maybe once a month or something. We'll see. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening and taking your time to listen to us. And thank you again, Brian. And,
thank you.
We'll have a chat after the show ends, and I'll see you again, guys, soon. So have a great rest of the day wherever you are, and thanks all the moderators as well. See ya. Bye.